beings. You want people to act like good human beings? Treat them like one. Mm-hmm. They're showing up that way because all people have ever done is treated them like trash.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Homelessness has been front and center in Anchorage politics for years, but particularly during the COVID pandemic with the conversion of the Sullivan Arena into a mass emergency shelter. The debate has been dominated by those of us who have never been homeless. In fact, few of us have ever had any meaningful interaction with actual homeless people. Today, we talk with a woman who has experienced homelessness at various stages of her life in multiple cities in Alaska, including Anchorage. Natasha Gamache will explain how she first ended up on the streets as a child, what has kept her there, and what she most wants listeners to know about the homeless. Warning: this episode contains graphic content, including descriptions of substance abuse, rape, suicide, and the physical and sexual abuse of children. I don't know how to say your middle name.
So the name on my Facebook profile, that's not my middle name.
Oh, okay.
It's my Inupiaq name.
Okay, roger that.
So if you see people on Facebook, there's a lot of natives that do that. Mm-hmm. My strong suspicion is that most of them have labeled it like I have, like we've all kind of patterned it after each other, where like Charlene Upuk is a good example. I'm pretty sure her middle name is not Ukpik, but I know that's her Inupiaq name.
Gotcha.
So a lot of people do that just so that they are using their Inupiaq name. Mm-hmm. So that's mine. So how you pronounce it is Aġnaŋuluuraq.
And that's your Inupiaq name?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I guess that's a good starting place. How did you get, where did Natasha come from? Or, I mean, did you get both at birth, or?
No.
Okay.
No, so, my parents were teenagers when they got pregnant with me. Natasha was the name of one of my mom's drug buddies.
Oh, wow.
She liked the name, and so she named me after the girl she did drugs with.
So, where were you born? In Anchorage?
No, I was born in Washington. Eastern Washington.
Eastern Washington.
Yep. The redneck side.
Gotcha.
We moved a lot. I mean, we moved a lot growing up, but I think we moved to the Spokane or Wenatchee area. Then we moved to Yakima area. Then we moved to Seattle. My dad joined the military. And then from there, we moved to Germany.
Oh, wow. So your parents were teenagers, but they stayed together for...
Sadly, a number of years. Mm. And so, yeah, so my dad was in the military, and then we lived overseas, and then we moved to California, and then we moved to Alaska. My mom and us kids moved to Alaska when I was like 5 or 6. And I lived in Nome for a year, and then we moved to Hawaii. I lived there for almost 4 years.
And did y'all have a connection with Nome? Is that why she moved to Nome?
Yeah, my mom's family's from White Mountain.
Okay.
Which is like, which we never eat. East of Nome.
Okay.
Yeah. So my mom's mom, all her family is Fish River Inupiaq.
Okay.
And so Nome is where my mom spent some time growing up. That's where my grandma grew up. Spent some time, I should say, her later teenagers. Because, you know, that was back when they were still doing boarding schools. Mm-hmm. And so in order for my grandma to attend high school, she had to leave White Mountain, where she grew up, White Mountain and Council, and move to Nome to go to school.
That's interesting. I mean, not entirely surprising. I'm assuming White Mountain was super small, so...
It's very small. It's about 200 people today, last I checked.
Mm-hmm. And what about your dad's family? What's their story?
Oh, geez. Well, my dad was the middle child of 6 children. And that poor guy. We don't know who his biological dad is. My grandma had him between marriages. So he was very badly abused because he was not her second husband's child.
Got it.
And then, so when they met, she had 3 older kids, right? They were all teenagers.
Was this in Washington State?
No, they met in California.
I assume he got out of there as soon as he could, and then he met your mom in Eastern Washington?
Yeah, both their families moved there. I have no idea why. Neither of them had a connection there. But they moved to the same area, and that's how my mom and dad met, and they both came from very, very abusive families. And, aside from someone dying, I don't think it gets any worse than what they went through. And so, water seeks its own level, right?
And do you still have a relationship with both your parents?
No.
No. Neither of them?
No.
Did you cease having a connection for your own, self? To protect yourself?
Oh, yeah. So, growing up, my dad... I lived with my dad while my dad was around, because he was military, so he'd be off on deployment, come back, be on deployment, come back. When he was around, he was extremely violent. He was an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. He was doing, meth when they called it speed. But, he was military, and all of his military friends partied like he did, and that was what you did. And so, he was very violent. The drugs always made it worse. The alcohol always made it worse. And
I think you mentioned that your parents had met as teenagers.
Yeah.
And your mom had named you Natasha after a drug dealer that she knew, or
drug buddy. Somebody she did drugs with.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So your mom also had a relationship with substance abuse.
Absolutely. Yep. She's an alcoholic and an addict. Both my parents were alcoholic and addict by the time I was born. And, but my dad was violent. My mom was just severely depressed.
And I assume you're the oldest child?
Yeah.
And how many younger brothers and sisters do you have?
I had 3. I have 1 now.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. 2 of them, my brother Shane and my sister Chantal, both died from suicide.
Oh my gosh. We're talking about all the moving around. I assume your mom would move while your dad was away, and then he would just come back to wherever you guys were?
No, when you're in the military, they move.
So you were moving with you. You were moving as a family. Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. But not to Nome, because I wanted to get back to that. So you went to Nome. You said, how old were you when you were in Nome for a year?
5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
My dad tried to kill my mom when we were living in Germany. And so we left Germany and moved to California. We left without my dad. It was me and my younger brother and my mom. We moved to California, I'm not sure for how long, but my mom got pregnant by some other guy. And then we moved to Nome after that.
Okay.
And while we were there, my dad wanted to get back together with my mom, and my mom was realizing how hard it was to be a single parent. She had 2 kids. She had another one on the way.
And she had you when she was a teenager, so when you were 5 or 6, she was 21, 22.
Yeah.
She was super young.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so... Anyway, my mom and dad got back together on Valentine's Day, which is an awful day. I hate that day. There are so many times my parents got back together on Valentine's Day. I hate that holiday now. But we left Nome on Valentine's Day, and we moved to Hawaii, and We lived there, and then we left and moved to Texas. You know, and my parents stayed together up until we moved to Washington, and my dad tried to kill my mom again.
Oh, wow. How old were you when that happened?
11.
So, and at that point, was that the last straw for your mom, or?
Oh, no.
No.
No. They say it takes domestic violence victims, on average, 7 attempts at leaving before they finally, leave for good.
And when, was he beating her? Was that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And he was beating us, too. I mean, and he was beating the dog.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was like... I mean, I don't want to get too graphic on your podcast, but it was like... It was like growing up in hell.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen my dad punch my mom, kick her, rip her hair out, break her bones, throw her against walls, choke her, drag her down gravel driveways. I mean, threatened to kill her. It was after that we ended up living with my Aunt Evelyn, and, by that time my dad was pretty messed up. He would call, and, it was way back.
And where was your Aunt Evelyn?
My Aunt Evelyn lived in Orville, Washington, and so we went and stayed with her to try to get away from my dad, and that was in the early 90s, right? And so I don't even know if they had caller ID then. Did they have caller ID? I don't even remember.
Jeez,
I'm so old.
I think we did, but anyway.
I don't know if they had it.
Right.
So I got stuck answering the phone all the time.
To make sure, to see if it was him.
If it was him. And then he would tell me all the things he was going to do to us if he caught us. And he would threaten to cut our brake lines. He threatened to rig the car so that it would blow up.
And he knew where you guys were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So you lived with that fear that your dad was going to come do something bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he terrorized us. And he would stalk my mom. He would circle my aunt's house, and he worked as a mechanic, so we'd see him driving by the house in other people's cars. All kinds of stuff. I mean, it was awful.
And where is he now? Or
West Virginia.
West Virginia.
Yeah. He made a decision to move there because West Virginia, for those that don't know, is the whitest state in the Union. My dad is very much very racist. That's
so he's
putting
like
it
a white
mildly.
nationalist?
Yeah, he's probably what I would say is like a neo-Nazi.
So, why, I mean, it just seems it's a surprise because your mom being Native and him therefore having Native children, I mean, that didn't seem to make a difference for him.
You would be shocked at how often it happens. Because, and think about it. If my mom's Native and he doesn't like brown people, then what he's doing to her is not wrong. Right? What he was doing to us is not wrong. That's how you treat brown people. It's okay to treat them that way. Sadly, most of the police departments we had to deal with agreed. They never did anything about what we were going through. Office of Children's Services never did anything. The military, how do you be a methamphetamine addict and an alcoholic in the United States Armed Services, beat your wife and kids, and never once got in trouble for it?
So how did you escape it?
My mom moved us back to Nome after he tried to kill her again, and then he tried to kill us kids. He was high one night. I don't even know what happened. I think they might have split up actually, but we were at this house we called the White House, and ugh, it was haunted, but anyway. But my dad was not supposed to be there. The dog was barking during the day. She had been barking the night before. And my mom was like, why is the dog barking? Because, if you live in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing there for the dog to bark at. Well, the next day, dog starts barking again, and my mom got worried. Come to find out, what I was later told by my Aunt Evelyn, because I have no memory of this, but my Aunt Evelyn remembers it clearly. And she's not an alcoholic, so I trust her judgment on her memory. But she said that my dad had shown up with a hunting rifle and was coming to kill all of us. And so he chased my siblings and I through an apple orchard, threatening to kill us, and was trying to find us so he could kill us. And we ran all the way to the road, and apparently my mom had the wherewithal to call my aunt and have her meet us at the road. And so we ran through the orchard, made it to the road. My Aunt Evelyn picked us up, drove us from, we're outside of town a couple miles, drove us back into Orville to her house, and my dad followed her with his rifle. And she got out of the car and was like, you're only going to take these kids or kill them over my dead body. She was a white lady, and she was pretty, and she was young. You know how America is. The typical poster child of missing or murdered, whatever. And so my dad knew better not to mess with her. So he left and left us. And eventually what happened is we moved up to Nome. That's where my mom's mom, my Grandma Fran, was at. And my Grandma Fran told my dad if he ever came to Alaska, she'd make sure he ended up dead and never found. And to this day, my dad will not step foot in the state of Alaska. I have a son graduating, first child in both my family lines to ever graduate from college.
Yeah, I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. So that's
your oldest?
Yep. And my dad and him have a minimal relationship, but first in the family to graduate, my dad won't come to Alaska because he still believes to this day if he comes here,
your grandma will
make sure he's killed and never found.
Where's your mom now?
Living off of Muldoon.
Oh. And you said you don't have a relationship with her right now?
No, my mom is very unsafe. So once her and my dad split, there's a trauma process that happens where it can happen. It doesn't always happen. But once someone leaves an abusive relationship, sometimes they can become the abuser to then other people, right? And that's exactly what happened with my mom. So my mom, was... I don't even have words for what it was like growing up with her, but she's tried to kill me multiple times. She's tried to run me over with cars, tried to kill me with knives, you name it. And
is she still dealing with substance abuse issues?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yep.
So, where did you go to high school?
When I did go to school, it was Numbelt Junior Senior High School.
Okay.
But I mean, if we looked at my attendance record, I was not winning any awards.
Tell me your story as a teenager.
Well, I mean, I always started when we moved here to Anchorage the first time, which is when I was 11. And that's pretty significant for me because we moved here again. That was one of the times my dad tried to kill my mom. So we left. We came up here. We were staying with some family, and then it was not getting safe for them. So then we ended up moving into the Clare House, when the Clare House used to be a DV shelter off of Arctic.
Oh.
And so that was our first time living in a homeless shelter. It was not wonderful. Let me tell you. Was not a good experience, but we ended up getting into an apartment in South Anchorage, off of Diamond. And once we were in that apartment, my mom was drinking all the time, partying, whatever, and she had taken on a roommate to help pay the bills.
Because she was still in her 20s when you were
my mom was like 25 at the time.
Yeah.
So she took on a roommate. Well, I first started drinking and using with that roommate.
So you were like 11 or 12?
It was definitely 11.
Okay.
And my first drink was my first drunk. It was my first blackout. It was the first time I used drugs. And later on, I started drinking and using with my mom.
And did your mom know that time?
I mean, how would you not know your kid is blackout drunk?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're blackout drunk.
Right. Right.
Very possible, but no, I think my mom knew, and I don't think she cared. And then when I started drinking and using with her,
just another drinking buddy.
At no point in time was my mom like, no, you can't drink.
Right.
My mom would be like, hey, you want a hit?
Mm-hmm. So that would definitely affect your attendance in school for sure.
Absolutely. And then, my parents got back together on Valentine's Day after I turned 12. And so then we moved back down, and then we, whatever. Then we moved to Nome, and that's where we stayed after that. It was the fall of whatever year I turned 13.
Mm-hmm. But you kept drinking and partying in Nome?
So I had to wait. Like, I couldn't drink while we were with my dad because I knew enough to know that it was not safe. But as soon as we got to Nome, I was like, the first opportunity I had to get drunk, I was guzzling R&R. Like who guzzles?
Right.
Hard up like me.
Right. And did your grandma know about it?
Oh yeah, they knew.
And was she okay with it, or did she try to rein it in, or like was there anyone in your life who was kind of like, hey, this isn't healthy?
It wasn't until I was 14 that they were like, I almost choked on my own vomit one night. And after that, my mom was like, I think you have a drinking problem, and I'm going to send you to your dad. And my dad was going to a 12-step program, and he'd gotten sober. And I was like, well, if I have a drinking problem, isn't that a bit of the pot calling the kettle black?
Right. And there's something kind of crazy about a 14-year-old having a drinking problem.
Yeah, I mean, my mom used the same way. My mom started drinking and using at 9. I'm not sure about my dad, but it was pretty young. Anyway, so my mom sent me down to my dad. Did not go well. My dad physically assaulted me. I ended up having to coordinate with people to run away. He starved me while I was there. I lost a significant amount of weight. Lost a lot of hair. Ran away. Came back to Alaska. And just started the whole thing over.
Wow. How did you end up with 3 kids by 24? Or,
Oh, God. I had 3 kids by 22.
Wow.
Don't do that. I don't recommend.
And was that in Nome?
Yeah. So, I mean, Nome was not a good place to grow up. I mean, it's not. For some people, it might be. For me, I never had people being protective. Not really. Some people might, give me a decent place to sleep at night, because I did that. I slept all over the place. We moved around a lot, sometimes 20 times in a year, and we lived with a lot of my mom's boyfriends. Mom had a lot of boyfriends. I can't even name them all. That's how many boyfriends Mom had. And, but I mean, nobody, like, even with the abuse that I was going through with my mom, with my grandma, with the drinking, with the drug use, I told the police, they didn't care. I told the schools, nothing happened. I told OCS directly. I knew exactly where the office was. and would go there begging for help, and nobody would help me.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think no one wanted to help?
Because, well, I think it's two things, maybe more. In our society, we have this concept of what we think things look like. Like when I say alcoholic, most people see guy, trench coat, brown paper bag, bench.
Right.
They don't see military, decorated, stationed overseas, married, 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what they picture in their mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we think of, what most people, when I come across them, when we talk about, what do victims look like? It's cowering, it's meek, it's crying, it's timidity, it's hopelessness and despair. And so, we save the good little kids that are good at being victims that don't talk back, that don't fight back, that don't do anything. Because in our mind, a victim is a victim of child abuse is a kid cowering in a corner being starved and can't stand the light or sound. A child who is being victimized will never speak out. So they didn't believe me.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like your own strength worked against you. Your willingness to speak up was a reason why they felt like it's probably not true.
Yeah. Even when I took them in with my brother, my grandma had beaten my brother with a belt that had a metal belt buckle. And I went to touch him on the shoulder one day. And he winced when I touched him, and I said, "What's the matter?" And he wouldn't tell me. So I looked under his shirt. He was covered in welts from the nape of his neck to the crack of his butt and either side of his back. Just covered. And I'll never forget that. We were at the teen center in Nome, and I said, Mom wasn't around, so I knew it was my grandma. I said, "We're going to get you some help." And we went to OCS, and I showed them my brother's back. Nothing happened. Nothing. I am not ashamed to say I didn't do anything about it at that point, but we went home, and my grandma pulled out a belt and tried to beat my younger brother, and I assaulted my grandma. And I told her if she ever laid a hand on one of my siblings again, I would kill her, and I'd kill her slow.
Is she still in Nome?
No, she lives right here off Boniface.
Oh.
So, yeah, even then OCS didn't get involved. My dad found out that my grandma had kicked me out.
So your grandma kicked you out after that?
Yeah, and my dad found out in Washington. He called OCS, and OCS got involved. They took my 3 younger siblings. I refused to go because I'm like, well...
Because you were a teenager.
I was like 13. And at that point I was staying with a friend. My best friend and her parents, who were good people. It didn't last long, sadly, but, Anyway, I didn't have to live with my dad because I knew lesser of 2 evils.
Were you in the military?
For a time.
I was just curious because did you? I mean, I didn't know. Like, were you following in your dad's footsteps, or just trying to find the way out, or how did that come about?
From the time I was really little, I experienced sexual abuse. And then when
from your mom's boyfriends, from
my parents, from other people in my family. Then once we moved to Nome, actually, no, none of my mom's boyfriends ever did anything to me. It was other people in Nome. Sometimes respected members of the community. Nobody did anything, but I knew enough to know, I just wanted a normal life. Like, and that's all I wanted, like, since I was like 8 years old. Like, I just want a home. I just want like a nice family. Like, I just want safety and stability. And I thought by joining the military, I would quit being homeless. I would have an income. I would, you know,
Find a way out.
Right. And that was my golden ticket. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was excited. I wanted nothing to do with my dad. Even though I come from a very heavy military family, it wasn't about them. It was I just wanted some peace and some safety. And
the three things that you didn't have.
Yeah. And what ended up happening was I got in. I went to like this holding station, and then they hold you. I got held for a few months actually because they didn't have anything open.
Were you 18?
No, I was 17 when
17.
I joined.
Gotcha.
And then finally got into basic. Was in basic training when I was raped by higher ranking member of the Army. And I reported it, because I wanted to get, like help. And I was told that there's no way he would do that. You're lying. You're making it up. He wouldn't risk his career for someone like you. You must be crazy. And so I was kicked out of the military.
How old were you when you had your first child?
I got pregnant at 18, and I had him at 19. And I met someone just like my dad.
In Nome?
In Nome.
And were you drinking and using them?
Oh, yeah. God. I mean, so throughout, like, from the time we moved to Nome until I got pregnant the last time there, and I had to move away, but I was drunk, like, as much as I could be. As much as I could get my hands on it and get away with it, I was drunk, smoking pot, taking pills, snorting things, you name it. I was like, my drug of choice was oblivion. And so
that's kind of how you were living. You got pregnant 3 times. Why did you have to move away with the third one? Or what happened then?
I was raped.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I met my ex. We were party buddies. I wasn't supposed to be able to have kids. And so I wasn't using protection at that time because I was like, well, I can't have kids, right? I'd been told.
Why had you been told that?
I stopped having a period. And when I saw the doctors in Nome, they told me I had ovarian failure, that I was infertile. And I was like, yeah. No kids for this lady. And like 2 months later, I was 6 weeks pregnant or something.
Wow.
And he was not a good guy, and he was gone all the time. And when he was around, he could be nice, but he was abusive, and he preferred teenage girls. And so the older I got, the less interested he was in me, and the more interested he was in 14-year-olds.
Wow. And he's the father of your first and first 3.
Yeah. So after I was sexually assaulted, I don't even want to get into that part of my story because it's a lot. But that was my last sexual assault in Nome. I was raped twice in one morning and found out at the rape exam that I was pregnant. So, there's just nothing there.
You were raped by him?
And my mom's boyfriend's roommate. Like about an hour apart.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So you had to get out. And you moved with the 3 kids to Fairbanks?
No, I was still pregnant. I
moved
that's
to
right.
Anchorage. 2 kids and pregnant.
Yep. We moved to Anchorage. I moved in with a friend of mine. Come to find out she was a crack addict, and I didn't know it. She was a girl I grew up with in Nome, and then she moved down here. And so I left, ended up back at the Clare house. It was not a good experience. left there, ended up living in my car. So I was pregnant, had a baby and a 1-year-old. Ended up moving in with a different friend of mine. Her boyfriend was a crackhead. Moved in with a relative. One of her kids was a pedophile, so we had to get the hell out of there. Moved back into the car. I mean, this was dead of winter here in Anchorage. My sister killed herself. Yeah, and then it was shortly after that I got into.
How old was she?
14.
Oh my gosh. In Nome?
No, she was in Washington with my dad and my stepmonster. So, anyway, so we got into Alaska housing, but, without family, without any good community or social support, I mean, people like me struggle. My youngest kiddo was sick all the time, so I couldn't work, and when I did work, it was like sporadic, and it was awful. And I met some people, and they moved to Fairbanks, and then a childhood friend had moved to Fairbanks, and they said, hey, if you move to Fairbanks, we'll help you with your kids. And so I was like, great, I need help. They said, well, help you so you can work and get on your feet. And I was like, that's exactly what I need. And yeah, I mean, so I don't want to sugarcoat this. I was not a well person. I was very traumatized. I definitely had a drinking problem, but I wanted to get better. But there just wasn't a lot of opportunity or support. Anyway, so I was like, hey, wow, maybe this is like my golden ticket. So I move up there. And both the friends that had offered to help said, yeah, sorry. And I was like, I literally relocated.
Right.
350 plus miles away with 3 kids. And you just dropped me. And the one lady, she was a church lady, old enough to be my parent, was like, well, God told me that I can't do daycare. God says I have to do foster care. So if you want me to help you with your kids, you're going to have to put them in foster care. And I had like no choice. There was not a lot of options in Fairbanks. There still aren't a lot of options in Fairbanks. And left with like no other options, I was like, okay. I put my kids, I voluntarily placed them into OCS. If you don't have to do that, don't do that.
Did they end up with her?
They did. I got to pick the placement since I voluntarily placed them. And
do you think it was because then she would, I mean, I would assume that there would be some benefits to that she would get paid, you would get money. And so was that why she wanted to do that? Or do you know?
I don't know.
So you got the 3 kids into foster care with her.
Yeah.
And then what did you do?
I worked and I drank.
Okay.
Worked and I drank.
Because you were super young. You were 22 or
20. I was 24 at the
24.
time.
Okay.
So yeah, I was
still super young.
Yeah, super drunk too. I mean, if I wasn't at work, but I was working all the time.
What were you doing?
I was working at a DOC contract facility as a supervisor for inmates.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when you met your husband?
Yep. I met David in Fairbanks. He seemed like a nice guy. He was charming. He was funny. He seemed, interesting and reasonably intelligent, which let me tell you, I mean, in Alaska, it is hard to meet men up here.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought, oh, okay. And then he seemed interested in my kids, and I was like, wow, most guys, well, I mean, I don't want to generalize. In my experience, the men I've had in my life, men don't like kids. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be around them. They don't take care of them. They will make a crap ton of them and never support them. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't happen. So to have a guy be like, hey, yeah, I'll take you and your kids on. I felt like, grateful. Little did I know this man was a predator. We got a lot of predators in Alaska.
Mm. So what happened with David?
David was just like my dad, but worse. Abusive, alcoholic, drug addict. But he's also a serial pedophile. And so he abused me. He abused my kids. I'm sure he abused other people's kids. I don't know. APD won't investigate it. The state has refused to release any public statements about it. So, I mean, at this point, we don't know if there's any other victims, but I bet money there are.
And he's in prison now?
Yep.
And he's the father of your youngest?
My youngest 3.
Your youngest 3.
Yeah.
How did that go down, you sort of escaping from David?
Oh, God. That was a really hard process. I mean, I did the same thing that my mom did. I would leave, come back, kick him out, bring him back. I couldn't even tell you how many times that happened. In
spite of all you knew.
Yeah. Like, the biggest thing that I struggled with, and it's something that I struggle with to this day, is that, I've never had any support with my kids. It is one thing to, like, and I don't want to be offensive when I say this, because I'm not trying to make it sound mean, but it's probably going to come out that way. But when you're like, oh, there's a needy mom, let's give her money.
Mm.
What does that do? It might buy diapers. It might help them get into a place. That is a really nice gesture, and I'm not saying that it's bad. But you're keeping that person at an arm's length at least.
Mm. Like, you need somebody to come in and help you take care of your kids. You need a babysitter. You need,
something.
Yeah.
Anything. Right? And then we've consistently had nothing.
Mm.
Like, there's no grandmas, no aunties, no uncles, no cousins. Kids don't go away for the week. I know a lot of white uppity people that they're like, oh yeah, kids are going to grandma and grandpa's in New Hampshire for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
My kids have never had grandma and grandpa for the summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
My kids have never had grandma and grandpa.
Mm.
It's always just me.
Well, I definitely know what you mean. I can't relate, in the same way, but I'll just say that I think it's pretty common. I mean, Alaska's so far away from everything, but I think some of our listeners, although they may have never had circumstances such as yours, they can definitely relate to not having other family nearby, right, and what kind of pressure that can be in terms of, I have a lot of jealousy. My younger brother and his kids live near my mom. He uses my mom as a free babysitter all the time. Yeah. We don't have that up here, right, with our kid. It's like there's no free babysitter who can come over on the spur of the moment.
Yeah. Or even just someone to, not even babysit. Someone to come over and, like, play games with my kids while I'm here. And I'm like, I just need someone to sit with Logan so we can wash dishes, or so I can build furniture, or so I can pack and move for the umpteenth time. Just don't have that. And if we, a big part of our story is that, with domestic violence, with childhood trauma, with alcoholism, substance abuse, all of those are pieces of poverty. And what happens when you're experiencing poverty? It's really hard to maintain housing. So we end up homeless. And we don't have anywhere to go. Mm. I have family that literally lives right up the road from here. And they have a home. And I can't bring my kids there because my grandma would rather house convicted rapists and murderers than me or my kids. Mm.
So you're 10 years sober.
11.
Congratulations.
Thank
How did
you
you get sober?
Oh, man. That's a hard question. Do you want the nice answer, or do you want the really
real answer?
I was extremely suicidal. My life was destroyed. I was at this place of, how did we get here again? And I was really ready to die. And I've been suicidal most of my life. I mean, I blame myself for my siblings' deaths, because I've attempted suicide multiple times. And the first time I attempted, I was 12 or 13. Ended up in the hospital for a week from an overdose and, whatever. So the only thing that had ever stopped me was my kids, because I've always known I'm the only person my kids have, up until I had David, right? And then, I was hoping and praying and wishing he would get better, and it just never friggin' happened. And, and then David left, and David was in rehab, actually. And here I was, stuck with these kids, and I'm, super traumatized. I mean, I had, up to that point, I was 30. I had 30 consecutive years of nothing but trauma. With not good access to mental health care, no good social supports, not great community supports either. I mean, and here in Alaska, when you're trying to get help, every place that I've been to, they make it as hard as they can. They're going to make it as difficult. You are swimming upstream every single goddamn time. They're not nice. It is not pleasant. It is not it's not like a feel good, commercial. I'm forgetting that one. That one that I always love to make fun of. Anyway, it'll come to me. It's not a feel good commercial. It is an awful experience. Every time. Every single goddamn time.
So, you were suicidal.
Yeah.
You didn't want to leave your kids alone.
Yeah.
And that kind of pointed you towards sobriety. Did someone reach out to you?
No, I was going to Al-Anon, of all places. And my Al-Anon sponsor said I had to go to AA meetings. And I didn't want to go to AA.
Because you didn't think you had a problem, or because alcohol was too important to you?
No, because my dad got sober there. And
it was a bad association.
Screw my dad,
yeah.
Right? Whatever. But so my Al-Anon sponsor, because I was convinced by this point, I didn't have a problem. I had a life problem. If you had my life, you would want to be equally drunk. Nobody wants the life I have. Nobody. Right? So my Al-Anon sponsor says, you got to go to AA meetings. You got to learn compassion for alcoholics. And I was like, screw that. She's like, well, if you want to work with me, you have to go. So I did. And I never heard anything. Finally, I go to a conference. And a lady got up to the podium, shared her story, and her story was my story. Scared the shit out of me. I was like, what? This lady is talking about things that we don't talk about. And she's telling a room of 300-400 people.
Well, I think what's interesting about your story is that I think a lot of people, if they talk about homelessness, they'll say, well, these people have alcohol and substance abuse issues.
Yeah.
And which is true.
Yeah.
But I think that they think the magic bullet is if this person gets sober, they won't face issues of homelessness. So
I love people. God, they're so just.
Well, can you talk a little bit about that? About facing this, that it wasn't the magic bullet, that you still had the same struggles. Now you were sober.
Right. So, I've talked with a lot of homeless people. I haven't talked to every homeless person. Every single person I talk to has a story like mine. Trauma upon trauma upon trauma. There's so many layers of trauma What do you do with that?
You have stable housing now.
No.
No, you're still homeless?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so we were homeless. We got into a temporary rental, rented it. It was out in the middle of nowhere in the valley, and my son is autistic and was not doing well. He had to be at Providence Hospital for over a month. Providence asked me to move back to Anchorage. I said, I don't have anywhere to go. Someone that I know who works at SCF was like, oh, I'll help you find housing. And then didn't. And so then I was like, well, I can only do as much as I can do. And I tried looking for housing. I mean, that's bad. So, I mean, that's the other part of it is people think about, well, okay, homelessness. I mean, let's talk about homelessness. I've been homeless a lot in my life, a lot. I can't even count how many times. But I can tell you I've stayed in every shelter in Anchorage at least once, except for Brother Francis. I've stayed in the shelter in Fairbanks. I've stayed at the women's shelter in Nome. I've stayed at the shelter in Kenai, the women's shelter. I mean, when I tell you I've been homeless when I was pregnant with my fourth kid. We lived outside in a tent because we had nowhere to go. I've lived in cars. Yeah, I've been homeless a lot. Housing is not cheap. Daycare is not cheap. Right?
Right.
So what do? I just got a call from Cook Inlet Housing Authority late last night, and I was like, oh, maybe we're going to get a place because we're living in a hotel right now because we lost our place. And Cook Inlet goes, oh, you don't have a voucher? I said, no, I lost the voucher waiting to get into a place that would accept the voucher. She was like, oh, well, we're going to have to lower you on the waiting list because people with the voucher have priority. I said, but I have it and I lost it. And she was like, well, I'm sorry, unless you get another one, we have to lower you on the waiting list. I was like, but I'm homeless. Sorry. And then she goes, well, let's just verify your income. And I told her my income. And she goes, well, just so you know, because if we call you back in 6 months when we have an opening, you have to have minimum $30,000 a year income.
So you don't make enough to qualify for assistance?
I don't make enough to live in low-income housing.
So
how is that possible?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. I've heard people being disqualified because they make too much. But how can you be disqualified for making too little?
Because you have to have a minimum amount of income in order to pay the rent. Mm. And if the rent is not subsidized, you have to be, even if it's low income. Mm. I was like, what?
And so $30,000 a year is like $2,500 a month or so. I mean, like where would you get that? Like, I mean, how do they come up with that number? Do you know?
It's what the property investors deemed was the appropriate amount of rent for that unit, I'm guessing. It's not set by me, but I'm like, I have a kid with autism, right, who I can't get any services for, like nothing. So if I'm the only person providing care in a state that does not pay parents to be care providers of their special needs children, and we can't get anything else, then what do?
What is your income now? I mean, how do you get what's your income come from?
Disability. Mm-hmm. So I get disability, and then my son gets disability because he's autistic. Mm-hmm. But I mean, can you imagine what they pay you on disability? Not much, I'm sure.
So let's talk about Elmore and Tudor. This interview kind of came about because we had chatted a little bit online.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I get it. Like, I know, that there's like an element of not in my backyard type stuff happening because I live near Elmore and Tudor. Right. So, but I do, I want to know more about your thoughts on having the Navigation Center at Elmer and Tudor.
Yeah.
So, in our conversation, you said that you had thought of that location years ago.
Yeah.
What do you see as the benefits of that location?
So, my thought process was, okay, the intersection of Elmore and Tudor,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have? Northwest corner, you've got Ernie Turner Center, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a rehab.
Mm-hmm.
They also have a detox.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few medical detoxes we have in the state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to detox off alcohol, you can do it at Ernie Turner.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to the northeast corner. You've got A&MC, SCFA, and THC campus,
Mm-hmm.
right? We know a disproportionate number of our homeless is Alaska Native and American Indian. Not all of them,
Mm-hmm.
but a good number of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, hey, we've got medical. You can have, theoretically, see, this is one of those fixes that, wouldn't it be great if they had access to mental health care? I'm not even going to go into how hard it is trying to get care at the Native Hospital, but in theory, let's say it worked perfectly. That would be an ideal location. Then you look at the southeast corner, you've got the cop shop. Hey, the cops are there.
Right.
People are going to mind their P's and Q's. And then across the street, southwest corner, you've got what? That little bike lot that they test people on, and then first student busing depot.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of residential area.
That's true. I think the things lacking would be, like, there's not really a grocery store. There's not really a convenience store. There's not, in order for them, if somebody wanted to buy some food, they're going to have to walk. Like, it's a long way.
I mean, but so most shelters, and that was the idea, was this would be a shelter.
Right.
Shelters provide food.
Right.
So yeah, if you wanted your own food, yeah, you're going to have to walk to go get your food. But it's a shelter.
It should have some food.
The idea was, as I thought, well, I've stayed at the shelter. I've stayed in a lot of shelters. The one in Fairbanks, it looks kind of weird. It looks kind of like a military building. It's really like kind of, I don't know. But when you go in, the way they have it set up is really structured. And I was like, hey, this is how it should be. Instead of a 30-day stay, like Clare House, like Brofro, like, a lot of places, you get 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You go in.
So it's a realistic amount of time.
Right. You get assigned a caseworker. That caseworker works with you, and that caseworker is on site. It's not someone you have to leave to go find, right? They help you if you need an ID. Go get an ID. With birth certificates. If you need help getting a job, if you need interview clothes, if you need to do rehab, they have a program within the shelter that is a drug and alcohol rehab that you can stay in for 1 year. So it's like it's in the same building, but it's separate from the shelter. It's an actual.
So you basically have seen a model that you think would work here. And I guess one more question about Fairbanks, because I don't know a lot about that shelter. Is it easier to find housing in Fairbanks than Anchorage?
No,
just as hard.
Yeah, it's hard everywhere. It's hard across the country.
Right.
So no, it's not easier. And matter of fact, it was harder to get into housing there than probably. Well, Nome is incredibly difficult. But yeah, it was tough getting into housing there. That was 15 years ago.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not like this is a new problem. This is a decade after decade after decade. We know housing costs too much. The minimum wage hasn't gone up in 12, 13 years? Federal minimum wage? Or state minimum wage is still only, $10.25 an hour? You cannot work a minimum wage job and rent any place in the city on your own. You would have to get a roommate. You would have to get some kind of assistance. It's not possible.
And you've got kids, four kids.
I have 6 kids.
6 kids.
But I have, out of 6 kids, half of them are grown and out. And the other half live with me. But yeah, I have 3 kids.
People love to complain about how there's no there's no affordable housing in Anchorage. If you own a house, that means your house is going up in value all the time. So you know what I mean? The people who already own a house, they don't have a good motivation to build more affordable housing because that will make their housing price go down, which is great for people who don't have housing. But for people who own a house, they want their house to sell for more than they paid for it. They want the prices to keep going up.
Right.
Exactly. And so it's basically like saying, hey, people who own houses, we need you to do something that may not be in your financial best interest. And as we know about human nature, they don't want to do that. Not
immediately. See, that's part of the problem is everything that we think about is right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what Americans do. It's 10-second sound bites on Twitter.
Right.
That's the problem with politics. That's the problem with a lot of our society. We don't want to invest in the future.
Yeah.
If we were to fully fund early childhood education, and we were to fully fund the services needed to intervene in families that are experiencing domestic violence, families that are experiencing drug and alcohol issues, families that are experiencing mental illness, if we helped all of those kids, in 20 years, what would that do to our crime rate?
Mm-hmm.
What would that do to our criminal conviction rate? What would that do to how many people we have in jails? What would that do to our homelessness rate?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what? It would actually go down, and we have studies showing that if we invest now, it pays off later? We know it happens, but we don't want to do it. Why? Because we have a vested interest in not solving it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I go to schools, who do I see? It's not a bunch of Black people working, right? When I go to the hospitals, it's not a bunch of Native people working at the Providence Hospital. Who's benefiting off of this? This is not a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
Who's benefiting? White, middle-class Americans are benefiting off of the poverty, the trauma, the mental illness, the substance abuse of poor, disabled, mentally ill, and people of color.
Mm-hmm. Natasha Gamache, I want you to run for office.
Nobody would vote for me. I'm very disliked.
Well, you make so much sense. I'm so grateful for you coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll help, but I'll tell you this much. It is really important for me to let people know, when you look at the people, even the really hard to deal with people on the street, those are human beings. Every time I'm housed, my kids and I make it a regular habit to make them food. I am a poor, poor mom who's experienced incalculable trauma, whose kids have incalculable trauma. We make it a priority to feed the homeless, to give them blankets. And you know what? We go and talk to them. Because this is what I know. I never got better because people avoided me and treated me like trash.
Right.
That is not how we help people. And this idea, I'm not going to name names, but this idea of, we don't want those people here because, the mayor didn't do this right or the mayor didn't do that right. Who gives a crap what the mayor did? Treat them like human beings. You want people to act like good human beings? Treat them like one.
Mm-hmm.
They're showing up that way because all people have ever done is treated them like trash. Why would I act any better? If this is all I'm worth, why would I do anything different? You really want to solve the homelessness problem? Take actual measures to help them and treat them like a human being. You would be amazed at the beautiful people I have met on the street. My kids and I, when we go out, I'm not Christian, but we'll pray with them every time we give them food. They're overflowing with gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Can you pray with me? Thank you so much. I have never experienced that with someone who's not homeless. The level of sincerity, the level of genuine, just humility and gratitude and acceptance. These are not scary people. So my thing, stop demonizing them. These are not bad people. These are hurting people who need help. We need to treat them that way.
Huge thanks to Natasha Aġnaŋuluuraq Gamache for telling her story on the podcast today. Gratitude to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. And thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate us, and write a review. Tune in next week for another interesting guest.